Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is Ellen coming to you from the sunny tropical Isle of St. Bart's.
Well, good morning. This is Stan coming to you from Gainesville. And today on Light Talk, we have a special guest, another legend of light, Beverly Emmons.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
And SISTAH.
And SISTAH. SISTAH, it's plural today.
Hey, it's great to have Ellen back today. Boy, that's great.
Thanks, guys.
That's wonderful. It's been a while, Ellen. It's been a few weeks, man. Have you had a nice few weeks off?
Yeah, but hey, we did 2 in a row with Bradley and Jiyoung Chang. She was phenomenal too. So
interviews.
You guys are on a roll.
And today we have another awesome interview. First of all, welcome everyone to episode 277. And today we are joined by Legend of Light, Beverly Emmons. Ellen, please tell us a little bit about Beverly's amazing career.
I will do that. Beverly has designed for Broadway, off-Broadway, and regional theater, dance and opera, both in the U.S. and abroad. Her Broadway credits include Annie Get Your Gun, Jekyll and Hyde, The Heiress, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, Stephen Sondheim's Passion, Abe Lincoln in Illinois, High Rollers, Steppin' Out, The Elephant Man, A Day in Hollywood, A Night in the Ukraine, The Dresser, Piaf, and Doonesbury. Her lighting of Amadeus won a Tony Award. Off-Broadway, she lit Vagina Monologues and has designed many productions with Joseph Chaikin and Meredith Monk. For Robert Wilson, she has designed lighting for productions spanning 13 years, most notably in America, Einstein on the Beach and Civil Wars Part 5. Her designs for dance have included works for Lucinda Childs, Trisha Brown, Martha Graham, and Merce Cunningam. She has been awarded 7 Tony nominations, the 1976 Lumen, 1984 and 1986 Bessies, a 1980 Obie for Distinguished Lighting, and several Maharam American Theater Wing Design Awards. Additionally, she has created and curated the lightingarchive.org and lightingdb.nypl.org, 2 websites that make historical lighting documents accessible to students and scholars on the internet. Her career is documented at the performingartslegacy.org, and if I say so myself, her color lecture with Clifton Taylor for the Broadway Lighting Master Classes was an extraordinary teaching experience. Welcome, Beverly.
Yeah.
That's nice. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
Great to finally have you.
It's great to have you here,
It's great
Beverly.
to have you.
It's an honor for us to have you on our show.
Took too long.
Took too long.
Right.
There's still people waiting. Anyway, Beverly, welcome. And why don't we get started? Ellen, why don't you start with our first question?
Okay. You want to tell us a little about your childhood and your connection to being an artist?
Interesting. I had no direct experience with art. My father was a scientist and professor at Harvard, mechanical engineering and applied physics, and it was always fix it, do it, make it. His parents, his father was a carpenter who fixed furniture in the basement, and his mother was a dressmaker. So there's a lot of art there implicitly, but without the capital A-R-T recognition, shall we say. I got interested in dance in junior high and went to a dance camp in the Berkshires, and then went to Jacob's Pillow as a scholarship student. At Jacob's Pillow, I ran into, there was a woman who was the stage manager of the entire Jacob's Pillow 10-week festival, who was canvassing the scholarship students to get herself a crew. And her remarks to me was, "Hey, kid, you want to work backstage?" This woman's name was Maxine Glorsky, and she has had a huge, huge career in the dance world ever since. From there, I went to Sarah Lawrence College because they had a good dance program. And the professor there was a woman named Bessie Schoenberg, who also, and the emphasis on the department at Sarah Lawrence was creativity. You didn't get credit there for singing technique, acting technique, and dancing technique. If you want that, they said, go to go to a conservatory. There was an element of you had to create something. As Bessie said, well, if you take a class, you don't get credit for the number of books you read, you get credit for the paper you write. So in that sense, we were doing dance composition classes right from the beginning for 3 years while I stayed in the dance program. What's interesting is there were only 25 or 30 students at that time. It was a small school. One of them was Lucinda Child, who was a senior when I was a freshman, and one was Meredith Monk, who was a class ahead of me, just to give you an idea. Brian De Palma was there. Jane Alexander was there. For a very small school, there were a lot of people who had an influence in the world. My freshman year, I said to Bessie, can you get me a job at the American Dance Festival? Because if you're going to be a dancer, you have to take class all the time. Could you get me a job on the crew? And she said, oh, you're not good enough. Bessie, being Germanic, was always very clear. I like that. And as a freshman, what did I know? I mean, sure, maybe. But it was then a girls' school. And when we came time to doing the dance concert, everybody else was afraid to climb the ladders. So suddenly I was hanging lights and plugging things in and doing that, and brought it up again to Bessie. By then it was April and the crew was filled, but she lifted the phone and got me a job that minute on the crew. They didn't have the position they put me in was something called board chief, light board chief. The light boards at the time were 2 dancers running auto transformers over my head, 2 rented Broadway piano boards, and 1 Adele Davis with 6 sliders. And so it was a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids running dimmers. And so I was just keeping a track of everything Tom said, because the major thing with reference to this project is that Tom Skelton was there, who's one of our major designers of that generation. He and the way he would do lighting was completely free associated. There was a plot. It was always the same, so I was comfortable with it. We understood what it did and what the focus was. A choreographer would come in with a new dance or something, or whether it was one he knew before, he'd say a couple of words to the choreographer. He'd give a list of color changes to the girl on the crew who organized the color that put him in the head, highs, and shins. And then he'd say to the choreographer, that's fine, you just go ahead, space out, just take your time. And Tom would be lighting on top of it and throwing those cues as fast as possible. And he would say to the stage manager, that's Q10, while he was still working on Q9. And you had to keep rolling along. And he was writing the bow cue when they were practicing the bows. It was completely free associative and fast. That's why he invented the magic sheet. He had to be able to do it that fast and find his channels that fast.
So wait, you just told us the genesis of the magic sheet. Tom Skelton was the inventor. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
That's very cool.
I have a quick follow-up. So for the daughter of the mechanical engineer who taught at Harvard, did you feel more comfortable in lighting than you did in dance?
Well, that first summer, obviously, I didn't know there was such a profession as lighting design. I had no idea. So Tom was it and was demonstrating what you did. I was perfectly happy to do the physical work of crew. That was all fine. In fact, I got there a couple of days early, and Tom Watson, who for a long time was the production tech director there, he said, there are a bunch of lights in the basement, 30 or 40 Lecos. Why don't you pull them all up, get them all up tomorrow and clean off the lenses? I'd never taken apart a Leco before, but I did it. He was absolutely astounded that I'd gotten it all done in the day. So in that sense, I jumped in to do the work with enthusiasm. Every modern dance company was there. Paul Taylor's, Oriole, Alvin Ailey was in residence. There was the Limon Company. Everybody came through, and it did a final festival of Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday matinee, Saturday night, Sunday matinee, Sunday night of the Martha Graham Dance Company and the Jose Limon Dance Company. And it was not the same program. It was a different program every day. and it was with a live orchestra. And so that's where, and with that came with the Graham Company, who would waltz in there like gods and goddesses at the end of the summer, would come with, and Gene Rosenthal would come. And sometimes there was a stage manager, and one season they asked me to stage manage because they didn't have a stage manager. One of the stage managers who came with Gene Rosenthal was Gordon Davidson, who then went on to LA. So where now the comparison with Tom, who would light the Limon ballets that he'd been lighting for 10 years, he would light it different every time. He'd say, well, I feel differently about it now. Whereas Gene took us, all of the board operators with their pads and me, into the green room and opened her notebook and dictated the cues for the performances of the Graham Company from her records, from her notes. Her notes were clear enough, and she and Tom had collaborated on the plot, so the plot was accurate for her. All of the color would come out between the two companies. So what Jean did was she sat down and she was dictating to us the cues and the dimmer levels. That went on for 45 minutes or so, and then she was called away to the telephone. But by then I had understood what she was doing, so I kept going. And when she came back, her first impulse was to be angry, but she swallowed it when she discovered I had done it right.
So wait,
it was
so are
correct.
you saying that Skelton was more improvisational and Rosenthal was more, should we say, archival, more structured?
Jean, that's what she did all the Broadway shows. I mean, to this day, when you take a show out on a national tour or a bus and truck, you're working from the original and you're expected to reproduce the original, especially a big national tour. So absolutely, that was her total training. You light it once, that is the lighting, and every time you do it again, you reproduce that.
But Tom lit it differently each time. That's sort of like more like busking, more like rock and roll in a sense.
No, I think she meant each time a piece came back, not every night.
Yeah.
Not every night. No, not every night. But and rock and roll didn't exist in 1961.
I guess that's
he had gone as the only person, stage manager and lighting and everything, with Saul Hurok tours from people from all over the world, and had done lighting for Indian dance companies and all kinds of. He had very interesting experience. And only some Broadway. There got to be more Broadway with him later. His was all dance.
You know, in those days, I think the choreographers worked differently as well. I bet Merce was certainly more improvisational, working the piece through as he did it, as opposed to maybe a Martha who was more structured.
Well, certainly Merce's ideas of indeterminacy and randomness came along later. Yes, everybody else, they would choreograph it, and that was it. And that leads me to the next conversation. So we have two major designers who work very differently. Merce Cunningam did not stay on campus, but blew through, I think, 2 seasons where they came and they did a performance. I remember John Cage enthusiastically chewing tinfoil into a microphone. But I don't but I don't remember Bob Rauschenberg coming with them. So Tom lit them after talking to Merce and was very cognizant, and he talked about, and very respectful about, the light having a separate existence to the dance. And so what happened, chronologically speaking, is that by my junior year at Sarah Lawrence, I needed more detailed lighting teaching than the designer there was into doing. And so Bessie got Sarah Lawrence to give me credit for taking the lighting design class at Lester Polikoff's. So I did Lester Polikoff's class, and that was the year before Ken Billington did it, as it turns out. I find out later. And the teachers, of course, were Gene Farron, Chuck Levy, and Tom. And then my senior year, but since Bessie was so focused on creative work that if you've taken dance for 4 years, she's going to expect you to make some pieces that appear on the program. I had learned that I wasn't a very good choreographer. So I slid sideways into the theater program with Will Leach my senior year. And I did a lot of lighting of shows that were plays and operas and stuff that they did that year. And I would run in town and assist Tom Skelton and call the light cues on things like Zizi Jean-Mer and stuff like that. The January of my senior year, I got a call from Merce Cunningam. My design teacher at Sarah Lawrence had given him my phone number, and he had lost Bob Rauschenberg, who had basically done lighting on and off for him for almost 10 years and had articulated the design ideas that they all were interested in. I quote it on the Performing Arts Legacy document, but what Merce said to me is essential. He said, the lighting for my ballets should be like day. It should be like day in the sense that the tree looks different outside the window because the sun has moved and not because something emotional has happened in the room. And he also said, if I have my dancers all in a clump up left, I don't want you to take the rest of the light out and just aim at that, because that's telling the audience we're going to be there long enough for it to be worth your while to do that. This is a quote. And then he said, and the thing is that then if I break loose from that and then run down stage, you have to bring up the light ahead of me saying where I'm going. That's none of your business. That's my business. And I have found it over the years very interesting to insert randomness isn't a good phrase, but just aliveness that's separate from the actual. Years later, Andre Serban, I did an opera with him, and there was a long scene where we just sat there for a long time. And so I just made the head highs one at a time come streak across and go out. And then the next one streak across and go out. It kept the atmosphere alive, I wasn't pretending for it to mean anything. And Merce was very clear about having lights not mean anything. Many, many years later, during the dance umbrella, I lasted 3.5 years and then moved on. But years later, umbrella, watching Merce work with some artists and the lighting they were doing in a light plot that we made, and we were making rude jokes about if we had these lights in a pile on the floor, they couldn't have put them up. But they were working in a rep plot. But I realized on a very deep level that Merce wanted to be like Picasso. He wanted to have a plain white piece of paper, and he wanted to be the only one drawing on it. And yes, he knew he had to have scenery. Yes, he knew they had to have lights. He knew there was no such thing as silence, so he had to have something. And so the composers that he and John would pick were very deliberately of the school of that were interested in John Cage's material and randomness and all that. And he would tell the composer, he would hire the composer, all he would do was tell them how long the ballet was. And they never even heard the music until the performance, not even the dress rehearsal. And Merce didn't like to have dress rehearsals. Usually I'm making light cues. They did a spacing and then went home to eat. And I finished up the light cues by supper time, and then we did the show. So it was a very different way of working than the others.
Just listening to this, I'm thinking Merce prepared you for Wilson.
That's right. Well, Merce and the avant-garde world they were allowed to think that I was okay because I had worked with Merce. It was a two-way thing. So I did 3.5 years with Merce, and we toured South America and we toured Europe a number of times, and there are many stories which we don't have time for. But he wasn't paying me 52 weeks a year. And the summer of 1965, I got a phone call from Jules Fisher, who suddenly he'd never had an assistant before. He suddenly needed an assistant, and he called Tom Skelton, and Tom passed my number to him. And through him, I worked with much more classical commercial theater projects. Suddenly there was, Sidelight, you don't need dancers' faces except minimally, whereas suddenly with theater, you need to see their faces. So suddenly there's area light and all kinds of things that I had no experience with.
Tell us about the force of nature named Robert Wilson. And were you part of his world when he was doing those, 24-hour pieces at BAM and all of that?
No. I came in after that. I was introduced to him. Jane Yockel of Art Services was on his board, and Bob had a piece touring the festivals of Europe that were very successful called Letter for Queen Victoria. And Bob insisted on renting a Broadway theater to put it on in, and everybody recognized that there was supposed to be a union designer. So they connected me with Bob then. But there had been a woman traveling with the company who's, oh dear, her name's going to come to me. She's had a long career off Broadway with dance. She had toured with Merce, and Merce would yell and scream until he got something he liked. And she had made meticulous notes. So I went through her notes, made a light plot based on that, and sat down and cued the whole show in 4 hours, whereas the company was used to standing there for 24 hours while I yelled and screamed. So he was quite amazed that it was so easy. And then he invited me to do Einstein on the Beach. 1976, the festival at Avignon, paid for by the French government and the Italian government. And then it went on to a European tour. It went on to the Met, which we did in 2 days at the Met, and then has had other 1984, 1992, and then a recent revival. In each time, Bob changes a little bit what he has in mind to do. He's an extraordinary artist, and because he. Well, let me just tell a couple of stories and you'll get the idea. Many years, I did 13 years, different productions with him. We had done a little show. I was sitting on my patio. This guy appeared. I thought I was hallucinating, is the title. And we did it off Broadway at, I don't know, Playwrights or Cherry Lane, something like that. And then it was going to go on a national tour. And the very next place was the Amundsen Center in Philadelphia, which is a stage of the general proportion of the Vivian Beaumont. Huge, big stage, everything. We had spent the day ahead before he got there and had the scenery, which consisted of a little drop, maybe 12 feet high by 20 feet wide. And it was hung mid-stage, but there was no masking yet, and there was a work light on. 10 o'clock the next morning, he came through the double doors at the back of the house, 40 feet from the stage, stood there and looked at the stage and said, the back wall is off center by 1/4 inch. And he was right.
Wow.
And one of the things about Bob is that he's not jerking your chain. He is seeing that. And one has to respect that kind of an eye.
Mm-hmm. He trained as an architect originally, didn't he?
I think so.
I think at Pace at Pratt Institute, I believe.
Pratt.
Yeah.
He was at Pratt. Yeah. Again, there are many Bob Wilson stories, but the one I think is appropriate for people to understand his lighting ideas. Stan, you said you had seen the Rome section of the Civil Wars, which we did at BAM.
I saw Act 5. Yes, when you were checking it.
It's called Act 5. Yeah. Well, there was one scene and one moment in that production. At that point, Bob did not allow any light to hit the floor unless it was specific for the floor. It could not hit the velour on either side. It could not hit any scenery. It could only hit exactly what he wanted it to look like. In this scene, there was a huge branch that stuck out in three, about 15 feet, with a woman sitting on the very end of it, right, looking like an owl, right? And so the specials lighting her could not fall past her onto the floor. It could only be cut to her. Jumping quick to an Einstein moment, there's something I learned with him is suddenly in version 2, he wanted the first thing to come on was a conch shell, and he wanted that lit with a vertical stream of light. And no light can hit the floor, only the conch shell. So the way you do that is you get a 6x6, and the first electric is 30 feet in the air. You get a 6x16 and you make it sharp, and you cut it to within the conch shell. And then you let it slightly fall out of focus, and that lights the shell without the floor. Okay, then he walks through the back door the next day and says, oh, I don't know, I think I want it moved over 3 feet. And now you have to rehang the first electric in order to get it to be a vertical stream of light, which has to be a vertical stream of light. So
pretty demanding.
It's demanding, but it's also, no, that's what he wants to say. To continue with the scene with the owl, it was a big open stage. There was a sight gliding of some kind. This relatively dark. And Mrs. Lincoln is going to enter from into stage left and walk slowly across, about 2/3 of the way across the stage, and then sing an aria. And holding her hands like this in front of her, Bob said he wanted the hands to be brighter than her face. Absolutely had to do it. Okay, now to follow, she was wearing a long black dress with a train. To follow her across the stage, he wanted her lit from a special that did just her face from stage right that she's walking into, and another special just on the front of her dress. All right. And then the back of the dress had to be lit with another special from stage left. Now, none of this could hit the floor. So the one from stage left, which had to fall down on the train, had to be a foul spot, had to have a man on it to slowly lift it as she moved across the stage. And the ones hitting her face had to slowly get larger as she got closer to it and move down a little bit to cover the dress. Okay. So now you put a big X on the floor, and the performers working for Bob absolutely know they have to make those moments. And the way we did it was that she was facing not dead on stage right and not dead on to the house, diagonally. And so what we did was you put a Lucian follow spot in 4 that shot across the stage, missed her and hit her hands, and landed in the back of the proscenium down left. So nobody could see it. And that solved the problem. But I'm telling that story because every one of Bob Wilson's pieces, almost every minute, has that kind of detailed lighting that needs to be done.
I've got a follow-up question to that. Yeah. Okay, you have to be honest. Did you lose sleep at night? Or was every day you came into the theater and thought, today I'm going to conquer the world, and tomorrow's tomorrow?
I would answer that a different way. Yeah, of course, it was a little stressful. But one of the things that I learned early on is that if Bob had the slightest sense of my pushing him, or if he had the slightest sense that what I was going to say was no, or it can't be done, even if I didn't say it, but he could feel it in my body, he would then take the next 4 hours to prove me wrong. So one of the things that I ended up doing with producers is going to the producer and saying, I know you think that when the designer comes with the director, the designer is going to be able to nudge him along. Don't think that I can't do it. If I try and push him, it will cost you a lot of money because he will slow down. So in that sense, I disconnected myself from feeling like I have to solve him. Yes, I have to solve him, but I'm not going to protect their budget. If they book Bob Wilson by now, they should know what they're getting into. And later on, he was a tour de force for a producer to have him feel supported so that he didn't misbehave.
Well, I remember at BAM, it being a union house when Einstein on the Beach was there, and Bob, would you say, yes, but in Europe, I get 24 hours on the stage. What are you talking about? Let's keep going, Right,
and you can't do it here, right?
Right.
One more story. We were doing, it was still that. Bob had at that point 100 hours of queuing in his contract with the producer. And BAM, of course, they knew him. They knew how he was going to behave. So they had it all structured so that we would have 6 days of queuing and end up on Friday night with a dress run, nothing on Saturday, nothing on Sunday except the performance, hoping that Bob would therefore go away and get it finished by that Friday night. So we were working along and things were okay. But occasionally we needed something and we would go to Joe Malello and say, Joe, we need whatever it was. And Joe would say, what you see is what you get. Okay, all right. So we would press on. By Friday night, we had in fact touched every moment, but we had not rehearsed the 4 scene changes, which are very elaborate because you have to get rid of those follow spots from the scene with Mrs. Lincoln and set up another bunch of specials for the next thing. And so we'd never run it. We had only lit each moment. And we discovered that Harvey had invited 1,500 of his best friends to this dress rehearsal. And the crew was understandably in a panic. And I went back to them and pulled them all together. And I said, fellas, forget him. This is your rehearsal. We haven't done this. Take your time. I know it's meticulous and you haven't had a chance to try it. So this is your rehearsal. So we went up front. The first intermission was half an hour or more long. The second one was 45 minutes long. The next one, so forth. And Harvey finally came running down to the tech saying, what is going on? It's impossible. We can't do this. It's absolutely terrible. I said, Harvey, what you see is what you get. If you're going to do Bob Wilson, you have to be prepared for all of that. And he does elaborate stuff in Europe. They're used to him by now. He has a huge following. He's very popular. It's a competition for the producers who can pull off a successful Bob Wilson show.
So you've had an amazing amount of experience in the commercial theater, and a lot of our students have no idea what that means because many of them are not from New York or any of the big cities. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience in the commercial theater and try to explain to them what the differences are between like commercial theater and regional theater and not-for-profit theater?
This goes back to working with Jules Fisher because I got my first taste of the commercial theater working for him from his, at that point of view. He had been in New York City from the early 60s and must have had 50 shows running off Broadway when they were commercial ventures. And he had invited me to assist him also on a new production at the Circle in the Square, which was downtown. And he had done many shows for the Circle in the Square, Ted Mann and Paul Libin. And he said he was at that moment in small claims court because they had not paid him on something. And they called him up, Ted Mann called him up to do the next show, even though they were fighting about the last one. And Jules said he realized it's a game. Okay, I get it. It's a game. And I'll explain what that means. So doing the Lysistrata with Michael Kakayanis at the Circle in the Square, I was the chicken, right? I was 21 years old. I was instructed by Jules that we do not spend one penny of our own money on this. If you need something, you need a pencil, you go to Paul Libin and the general manager and get the money. Well, somehow or other in the course of the tech, 75 cents was spent. And Jules gave me Paul Libin's home phone number and instructed me to call him every night at midnight until that 75 cents was repaid. As I got further and then joined the union and worked on other shows, what has impressed me is that the various roles, we've been doing commercial theater in this country for 150 years. It has a long tradition that services us meaning everybody who works there. And there is a very special section of New York State corporate code which covers commercial theater. there are things that a commercial producer, for instance, holds all the liability and all the rights as the head producer. He can raise money and does, now that they cost $10 million. He's raising money from investors. He is not allowed to spend one penny of the investors' money until he has raised all of it. And that has gotten some people in trouble in recent years. What has impressed me is that the role of designers. Joe Malziner would tell a story about how we got into the union. The union used to be called not United Scenic Artists. It was called the International Brotherhood of Wallpaper Painters and Hangers in 1916 or some like. And he said that in 1928, the painters called him up and said, well, you're going to join our organization or we're going to quit painting. You got to join by January or we're going to quit painting. And he said, well, I was busy and Bobby Jones, that's Robert Edmund Jones, he was busy. And so we thought, oh, well, okay, we'll join. But there was no negotiated bargaining agreement until 1969. The contracts were promulgated, which means the union thought them up and wrote it down and gave an exam and said to the producers, our people are skilled because they've passed this exam. That exam was painting, costume rendering, scene painting, scenic design, all of it. In 1963 or 4, Jules was asked by Kermit Bloomgarden to light the next show that he was going to do on Broadway. Jules made application to the union. They said, well, you have to take this exam. Jules said, I can't, I don't do, that's nothing to do with what I do. I'm not going to take that exam. And my lawyer, and so there was a lot of pressure at that point. Peggy Clark and all then devised an appropriate costume exam, scenic exam, lighting, as well as the original scene painting. Jules took the exam and didn't pass. I don't work that fast, he said. But my lawyer will inform you that I will be doing the show. And there's a right to work law.
Great.
So he did the show and they took him into the union. And that sort of settled that issue. And then I took the exam in 1969 and passed it, whatever. But what's impressed me over the years, and this is what's relevant, unlike American economics, which is structured between labor and capital, as though they're two separate things. And we have the only business which has that recognizes the creative as part of the essential project. So from the point of view of students, what you need to know is that if you work on a union contract, not only do you get a fee, but you get royalties. Now, the problem is that the union can't use the word royalties because that's a money word, not a union word. So they have called it additional weekly compensation. There was finally a promulgated agreement in 1969, and there was an actual League of Broadway Theaters USA deal finally settled. A couple of years later, the League of Broadway Theaters all said, the producers all said, wait a minute, there's a Taft-Hartley Act. These people in the union are all colluding. They're all individual contractors. They're all colluding in the restraint of trade. That would have made us all like architects. Architects have to get the job by for free, entering these competitions, paying all of their people, and they don't get the work because somebody else got it. They would make us all into competitive designers like that. Thank heavens that did not happen. That's why we're still in a union, which is important. When the producers brought this up to the judge to undo the union, the judge looked it all over and said, wait a minute, you've been working this way for a long time. and threw it out. And that's why the union was protected. But I don't know, in the current atmosphere, if somebody brought that fight again, we might not be so well protected. So it's an essential that we understand that. Now, at that point, there was no regional theater. There was no nonprofit theater. All of those are institutions which have staffs and raise money and have each Broadway show is its own entity, its own business. So that's a very different mode in which to work. And the current discussion about W-2 income for lighting designers, hey, great. If you're going to spend most of your working life at a regional theater where everybody else is on salary and you're basically on salary too, that's all fine and maybe to your advantage. But my issue is supposing you're doing that and you're there for a while and then suddenly the administrators say, oh, by the way, this famous director is going to come in. We're going to do a workshop. We're going to do a rough-in show. And so-and-so is going to do some scenery and we'd like you to do the lighting. That should be covered by a union contract. What happens if it's good, a commercial producer steps in, is going to take it to Broadway and you're left behind with your W-2 work for hire? If you're like a photographer, work for hire, you do not own your copyright. We own our copyrights. And the inexperienced designer might therefore be bought out and not invited to go to Broadway, but has to be bought out because the rights.
Isn't that what happens anyway, though? I know tons
it's
of
not in the written document that I've been seeing. Language, it should be in the W-2 union contract that says if you do any creative work, you need to have a union contract, or at least you need to have your rights.
We had a very interesting conversation last week about how much designers get paid and how much we should pay our assistants
Should be more,
and things like that. And Stan said, why don't we get paid by the hour? And, which is very interesting because stagehands get paid by the hour. The difference is obviously that we're artists. And I'm thinking that maybe we should do what they do in Europe, and that is we get two fees, one for working there and the other for the art.
That's an interesting way. Sure.
And then, yeah, exactly. And then through your contract that says that, gives you certain rights, that design, and you must, it's basically, like a right of first refusal sort of thing, that we own that design.
1099 rules generally is that an employer has to give you all of the materials with which you need to work, namely, in the case of theater, an office, a computer, a desk, a telephone, everything you need. But the way we work is that we work at home on our home offices, on our home computers, and then send a plot around to various people. So nobody's filling in that part. At least not in the commercial theater world. And I don't know how much that happens in the regionals. In the normal regionals, they hire somebody from New York to come in and light something. Obviously, the New York designer does it at home or in his office. So those are issues. But to me, the distinction between work for hire versus owning your own copyright is something that can easily be buried and confused in this. And I was worried that if it's an old-fashioned W-2 salary, and everybody likes each other and knows each other, the young designer is going to feel very uncomfortable going to his bosses and say, I'd love to do the workshop, but you have to do another contract with me to do that. No, that should be understood in the basic union W-2 contract. Because let's just say I know my figures, and the creatives, the way a Broadway show gets paid for nowadays, 30 years ago it was different, but nowadays is that the money comes into the box office, the nut gets paid, the weekly expenses, and that includes some office expenses, that includes the public relations campaigns, okay? And then the profit gets divided 60-40. 60% goes to the investors, 40% go to the creatives. Now, I don't know all the exact percentages. I only know the union percentage. Your normal one is 0.5%. If you've got a lot of chutzpah and a good lawyer and some good reputation, you might get 1%. The only evidence I have for that is the only time this happened for me was on Annie Get Your Gun, which was a classical show. It had a big hit. The weekly profit was something like $300,000 a week. My piece of that was $8,000 a week until the show started paying less than that. But that's real money. So all the talk about designers not getting paid, that's fine, absolutely. And in my experience, which now I guess that counts as a long time ago, I did in the spring of 1990, I did 10 shows in 16 weeks. They were all off-Broadway, but playwrights, arena stage, a lot of a classic stage company, just under Broadway in scale. All right. If you do 10 shows in 16 weeks, that meant I had 2 days off total in those 16 weeks, because if I had a day off, I had to do the light plot for the next show. So when I looked into my checkbook at the end of that time period, which was 4 months, I had $3,000 in my checking account, enough to pay for 1 more month of family expenses. So that's when I said, I think I need a job. And that's when I got the job at Lincoln Center Institute. I had designed the theater for them, the Black Box Theater, and then they needed somebody to run the theater. And they were calling me up saying, do you know this guy and that guy? And I said, I know what you're imagining is a technical director with keys jingling on his belt. But what you don't need him, or if you do, you can have him by the hour or by the day. What you need is an administrator to run the whole thing, arrange rentals, arrange rental contracts, negotiate with people, and run the day-to-day operations with 2 fellows. We call them fellows like in science, a lighting designer, and a stage manager. And we had 10 in the 11 years that I was there, of people who, a lot of them went on to other professional careers. But it was a good job for first people to come out of school. And it needed to be a lighting designer, not an electrician, because there were shows that Lincoln Center was doing, it's just the education department, that the lighting designer got to light. And I don't believe in rep plots. So I would say to the people renting the show, renting the theater, we'd have a production meeting required by contract 2 weeks in advance. I would give them the light plot, which we had by then, of the way the piece was going to, the people who were in there before them, and said, this is the plot you'll have when you walk through the door, make whatever changes you need and can afford to pay a crew to do. So that was how we went on and on. So the renter never had to pay for a strike, for instance. We didn't force people to make it look our way because we had a rep plot. They all could do what they wanted and what they could afford.
Beverly, can you speak a bit about the subject of gender in our profession, past and present? Have women made more inroads? Were there more women in the early days? Where are we these days?
I sort of talked about this in the Ann Militello interview. There were 2 people that invented lighting design on the planet. One of them was Abe Fader, and the other one was Jean Rosenthal. She had been a stage manager in the 30s. She continued to do lighting, to become a lighting designer, and she and Abe were the first people to get credit. Peggy Clark was next. Jean, what was it to me? This is something we're not allowed to talk about until now. Jean probably would hate it. Jean was gay, and she had many assistants, women that she would work with. But what I noticed and became aware of is that she established the vocabulary of working with crews for women to work with a whole gang of men. Because she was just completely not interested, it took all the sexy talk out of the equation. It took the pressure off the crew. They didn't have to feel competitive with how could they get ahead with this broad. She would come in, it was all business. They loved her. how are you, Mr. So-and-so? How's your family? So nice to see you. I'd like to start focus at the end of the first pipe. Thank you very much. She established the please and thank you vocabulary. She established a whole vocabulary. And I, knock wood, I never had anybody make an inappropriate pass, ever. And I've asked other people now of a generation, and it's very rare. Obviously one used one's what we used to call feminine wiles when there was a problem. There was working for Jules. I was the assistant. I was juggling all the paperwork. There was a very famous electrician who had a crew of really good guys who did many shows. His name will come back to me. And he would scream at me, hurry up, there's a man on the ladder. And, they're taking too much time. And there's also a man over there on the boom who needs something turned on, and he needs something turned on. And I'm trying to say, where is Jules standing to make notes of the so forth. So I was juggling papers. It was a little embarrassing to be screamed at like that. But on the other hand, I did notice that his guys were feeling sorry for me, and they were therefore working faster and faster. And I thought, oh, okay, that works, whatever, that's fine. Another story along those lines is I was doing a show many years later, Cleveland Playhouse. They were having some kind of a fight, union fight. So there was a little tension in the air. It was a load in. I was in jeans and a jacket or something. People were running hither and yon and doing things. And I said to one of the electricians, could you do this and this and this? And he, over his shoulder, he said no and kept running. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. You never hear, there are always lots of reasons to not, oh, you better talk to my chief or this. He just said no. I'd never heard a flat no like that. So at coffee break, I went back to the hotel and I put on a mini skirt, stockings, heels, and a fancy blouse and fancy jacket. And I came back and I got yes, ma'am, all the rest of the day. So in that sense, those are gender examples of basically getting the work done.
Yeah, I think Anne has some slightly different experiences, but she was in the rock and roll world at that time.
Yes. And rock and roll is a whole nother thing. I mean, Broadway is very organized. It's expensive because everybody there is very special. But I loved working there because working with dance, I was the most skilled tech person around. They did not have, the management was all just learning. They didn't have production managers. When we created Tag Foundation, we were recognizing production management. So I had to organize the crew and the time and everything in order to protect my time to write like cues. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So we instinctively did production management. What was fabulous about working on Broadway is everybody there knows what they're doing. I don't have to do anything but worry about the lighting, which was fabulous. Yeah,
wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. And there was something about some designers saying that they had gotten screamed at by the general manager. And my only comment about that is that's his job. General manager's job is to beat everybody down and get it as cheap as possible. That the producer can say, oh, darling, we love you. Please, we want you to do the show. And then say to his general manager, not one nickel past 50 cents. That's the role. And so therefore, to take offense as, oh, my dear, I'm a woman, I shouldn't be yelled at like that. Everybody gets yelled at like that. That's how it works. So,
oh my God, you are saying things you shouldn't be talking about nowadays.
We're not going to cancel Bev Emmons. No cancellations of Bev.
No.
We're in a different world now.
I know.
Didn't we talk about that? Didn't we talk about that one day about the monsters of the theater and getting rid of them?
Yes,
yeah.
The monsters of the theater, absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
so I was going to ask a quick question to end this off.
Okay.
Because you have been through Broadway. You've worked it, you've designed in it, you've experienced it. You probably saw thousands of shows over the past, 30, 40 years, right?
I was even on the Broadway, on the committee, and saw 41 shows in one season.
So I'm going to ask you a real quick question because I love asking people who've really are real Broadway people this. What do you love about Broadway and what do you not like about Broadway now? How has Broadway changed?
I haven't worked on Broadway for 10, 15 years.
No, but you've seen shows, right?
I've seen shows. I've seen shows.
Yeah.
The color issue is a horrible problem. It's so extravagant, all the color changes that you can make, that people are just, it's just wild. And I a lot of my work was partly because of Merce, was steel blue and grays and browns and beiges and boy, you can't do that with this equipment. On the lighting archive, I did an analysis of the old colors and have the readings on a spectrometer of all the nanometers between 400 and 780 of our visual spectrum, so that our technology can't use it yet, but that's every single. And then I measured all the Brigham colors and a lot of the Roscoe and the early cinemoids with a reading of full 70, 50, 30, and 20%, so that you could see the red shift. You could see how those colors are changing. And I did it with the direct current on a resistance plate board, so as to make sure it was matched what the situation was. And that information is there. It's acres of numbers. Nobody knows what to do with it. It's there when the technology can get there.
Well, I have a question. I mean, yes, I mean, all that really makes a lot of sense, right? And the technology has changed so much. And your comment about color, I can't argue with that. Do you feel that's because of the zeitgeist of the modern culture, that people are expecting maybe people's attention spans are shorter and they need to be stimulated more? So designers are moving toward color to help stimulate
one
people?
Of the last shows I saw of Hal's before Hamilton was, The Temptations, which was gorgeous and steel blue. He didn't use a lot of color. It was gorgeous. And of course, with the LED technology, the timing is exquisitely, which you can't do with tungsten lamps. It takes a minute for them to fade down. Whereas this could be snapping back and forth and all that. That's fabulous. And so, no, life moves on. I think like sound, where the sound designers are making it louder and louder partly because the hair in their ears are getting disintegrated. I don't like the fact that it's getting brighter and brighter. I just listened to your Clifton Taylor one, and he loves it brighter and brighter. But I don't understand why that's necessary. If you can see it, you can see it. But that obviously is part of what's going on. And which causes which? The zeitgeist causing the expectation of gaudiness, or the gaudiness reinforcing the expectations on TikTok? I have no idea.
The Tik Tok Zeitgeist.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
This is what we're living through. Well, Beverly, thank you so much for being with us today. What an amazing, amazing life you've had and profession. You and your colleagues, we all owe you so much in the creation of lighting in the theater. And it's just amazing to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm definitely third generation.
Yeah,
there's Gene, and then there's Jules, there's Tom and Jules,
right,
and then there's me and others.
Well, the students should recognize that they all stand on people's shoulders, and your shoulders are one of them.
So thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me.
Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, livedesignonline.com, Amazon Prime Music, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
I just want you to know that all of Bev's stories are covered, so if you decide to litigate, the law firm of Flex, Flock, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us and her until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers and SISTAH, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, New York City, the tropical paradise of St. Bart's, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to join us next week when we chat about more useless things and explore the crazy shenanigans in our industry.
Light Talk is broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and great interviews with humor around the world.
So once again, we thank Beverly Emmons, another legend of light, for joining us today. And we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye.
Adios.
Thanks, everybody.